border crossings. This is not just an immigration issue, Mr. Speaker. It's a national security issue. Our border agents on the front line must be fully funded, and I urge my colleagues to support the Border Safety and Security Act. And with that, I yield back.
Yields back, gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I want to yield 2 minutes to an outstanding member of our Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, Ms. Roybal Allard of California.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to the latest in a long line of disingenuous bills that won't bring us closer to ending the dangerous and reckless Republican shutdown. This bill represents an irresponsible approach to the serious challenge of defending the homeland in an increasingly dangerous world. This bill purports to protect the public, yet it leaves critical functions of the Department of Homeland Security unfunded. For example, there's no money for TSA to keep the flying public safe. There's no money for the Office of Intelligence and Analysis to identify terror plots that endanger American lives. And there's no money for the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office to guard the homeland against smuggled weapons of mass destruction. Clearly, Republican obstructionism is undermining our American democracy and threatening our American national security. Mr. Speaker, the Boehner shutdown and the Republican gamemanship are hurting American families and endangering the American public. Let's defeat this bill, vote and pass a clean budget, and get all our government working to serve and defend all the American people and our American way of life. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to Candace Miller, the Vice Chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security and the Chairperson of the Subcommittee of Border and Maritime Security, and a member of that great class of 2002.
Great class. The gentlewoman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I certainly thank the gentleman for yielding. And Mr. Speaker, I rise today in very strong support of the bill that we're debating here, the Border Safety and Security Act. As Vice Chair of the House Homeland Security Committee and Chair as well of the Subcommittee on Border and Maritime Security, I, along with so many others, have worked to ensure that Congress gives the agents and the officers in the field the tools and the direction that they need to keep drugs and terrorists and others who would do us harm from entering our country. And that's what this legislation is about today. Now, much of the controversy surrounding the government shutdown has actually focused on Obamacare. But, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing, absolutely zero, in the bill that we are talking about right now that has anything to do with Obamacare. The only thing that's in this bill and that we are discussing today is whether or not we will help provide the funds to ensure that we can protect our nation's borders and pay the men and women of the U.S. Border Patrol, the Customs and Border Protection, and also the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Now, I know many of our friends on the other side of the aisle will once again oppose this legislation because they say they need an entire government funding bill or they won't accept anything else. And yet I would note that they are calling Republicans absolutists. I also know that there are many on the other side of the aisle that will support this bill and will help us pass this again with a very strong bipartisan majority. And I simply hope that the leaders of the Senate will look at the strong bipartisan support of this bill and take it up. Because border security, Mr. Speaker, cannot be a casualty of our inability to compromise. The agencies that are responsible for protecting this country must be fully funded. So I would urge the House to support this bill today, to pass this bill today, and I certainly urge the Senate and the White House to join us in supporting the men and women across the nation charged with protecting our border. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The Speaker will receive a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed with S.Res. 267 relative to the death of Rod Grams, former United States Senator for the state of Minnesota.
Gentleman from North Carolina.
I'm glad to yield 2 minutes to the ranking member of the full authorizing committee on Homeland Security, Mr. Thompson of Mississippi.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the ranking member, Price, for yielding the time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to express strong opposition to H.J. Res. 79, the Border Safety and Security Act. This is the second time in 2 weeks that I've come to the House floor to discuss cherry-picked funding at the Department of Homeland Security. Neither last week's measure nor the one before us today stands a snowball's chance of ever being enacted into law. Even if they did, Congress still would not have done its job to fully fund the important homeland and non-homeland security activities carried out by the Department of Homeland Security. As ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, I'm troubled that the Republican majority is not only picking winners and losers within the federal government, but also within the Department of Homeland Security. This country faces real threats every day, from natural disasters to accidents with catastrophic results to terrorism. The people we represent deserve real action, not petty posturing. For today's installment of the Mini CR show, the majority is shining the spotlight on ICE agents, Border Patrol agents, Customs Border Protection officers, and Coast Guard personnel. Americans see through this hollow attempt at using patriotic Americans serving in the front lines of Homeland Security as pawns. If the majority is serious about ensuring that our patchwork of federal border, immigration, and homeland resources is operational, they would reopen the entire Department of Homeland Security. This majority is not serious about taking real action. They want to score political points with a fringe element in their party. I call upon like-minded colleagues on both sides of the aisle to stand with me and approve a clean CR. I ask for additional 30 seconds.
Yield additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. With every passing day, more injury is done to the world, our economy, and our standing in the world. The once unthinkable, a default on U.S. debt, is looking more and more possible. We must stand together, inject some rationality here, and bring an end to this long national tantrum that has been orchestrated by 50 of the most radical members of the majority. Mr. Speaker, the majority must let this House consider and pass a clean CR so that we can get on with this government up and working again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my colleague from Texas, Mr. Culberson, the chairman of the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Subcommittee of Appropriations Committee, and a hard-working member of our subcommittee.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Carter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question that we're about to vote on is very simple. Do you support, yes or no, fully funding our law enforcement officers on the border and our Immigrations and Customs Enforcement officers? This is not complicated. It's not, there's nothing more complicated than we are, as the majority in the House, seeking to find areas of agreement. Common sense and common courtesy and any negotiation require that you find areas of agreement that are absolutely essential, set those aside, and move on to the issues where you may have some disagreement. This is not complicated. Yes or no, do you support fully funding our Border Patrol agents and our Immigrations and Customs Enforcement agents? That's the only issue before us. We have, as a Congress, already fully funded our military. We made sure that our men and women in uniform were paid. We've already in this House set aside, made sure that our veterans are paid for. We've passed legislation to ensure that they receive all the benefits that they have earned by their service to the country. Any negotiation, anyone, anywhere in the country, if you have a disagreement, you find areas where you can agree that are very important, and you get those behind you. And then you get to those areas where there are disagreements. And there are fundamental, important differences that are core principle to us as constitutional conservatives. We do not want to participate in bankrupting the United States of America. We do not want to participate in socializing the greatest health care system the world has ever created. We will not idly stand by and allow our children and grandchildren to inherit such a crushing level of debt and taxation that they cannot afford it, and their quality of life will be diminished. These are matters of core principle to us. Our right to be left alone as Americans is, I think, one of our most important. Certainly Texans feel that way. But first and foremost, we believe in law enforcement. We believe in supporting our military, and we urge our colleagues to vote today with us to enforce the law.
Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield 2 minutes to the ranking member of the Full Appropriations Committee, Ms. Lowy of New York.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to the reckless Republican shutdown. While the men and women who secure our border risk their lives, their paychecks are in jeopardy. I am very glad, Mr. Speaker, that the majority is talking about border security, particularly after they've frozen salaries for the Border Patrol for the past 3 years. Yes, we should fund border security. I've been a strong advocate for funding border security, but we cannot adequately protect our homeland by funding one agency at a time. We also must fund the Secret Service, the TSA, cybersecurity, none of which, Mr. Speaker, is included in this bill. Mr. Speaker, the claim that Democrats aren't negotiating is absolutely false. The Senate adopted the most important part of the House bill, the funding level, and the President supported it, even though Democrats want greater investments to support economic growth. The only thing Democrats say no to are irresponsible efforts to put health care decisions back in the hands of insurance companies, which has nothing to do with keeping the government open. That is democracy. That is negotiation. We have done more than meet in the middle. The Republicans now say no to their own bill. We could end the shutdown today if the majority will only support a reasonable solution to allow a vote on the Republican-written Senate-passed bill. Vote no. Demand a House vote to immediately end the reckless Republican shutdown.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, could I inquire how much time remains for each side?
Gentleman from North Carolina has 10 minutes. Gentleman from Texas has 5.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to another fine colleague from the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Farr of California.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Congressman Price, for yielding, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sitting in my office listening to this, and I realize that what our session's about are now telling the American people some of the truth some of the time. The truth of the matter is this is all about the fact that extreme division of the Republican Party doesn't like the Affordable Care Act, which was signed into law 3.5 years ago. And so they're using the appropriations process to shut down Congress. And we keep saying, well, you don't need to do this. That's been the law for 3.5 years. And guess what we've done in those 3.5 years? We've passed 17 CRs. 17 CRs have been passed since the Affordable Care Act was enacted. And guess what? Republicans voted for almost every one of those. So what's the difference now? This is the craziness. Our whole country is being put at risk because they won't do what we've done every year because they don't like the Affordable Care Act. Now, if you don't like something, this is an appropriations process. That's a lawmaking process called an authorization process. When you don't like something, you take a different bill and fix it. You can say, well, you know, we don't want to fix it. I use the argument, well, the Democrats didn't like Medicare Part D because of the way it was being governed. We voted against it. We never shut down government. We got around saying, yeah, it's the law, let's fix it. Because when you pass a big law, there are always some things you need to fix. We could fix things, but this is the process of doing it, not shutting down government. And the idea of bringing you whatever you like today, we're just going to vote one thing, one part of government. Now we're on just one piece. But you know, they're never going to get around to all the pieces because they don't like all of government. So they pull these votes up. This is ridiculous. This is putting the country, the world, and lots of people at risk. And it could be done by just passing a Keep the Government Open bill, which we've done 17 times since 2010, 17 times, without this rancor, without this division. Come on. Don't give us part of the truth some of the time.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire if my colleague has any more speakers?
I'm ready to close.
I'm prepared to close. Then I'll reserve.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, our Republican colleagues today have spoken accurately of the time-honored tradition, they called it, of passing a budget in this Congress and then passing appropriations bills, one hopes, on budget and on time, in an orderly fashion, conforming to the agreed-upon budget resolution. Now, for a while this year, we thought we were on the same page on this issue, on that question of needing an agreed-upon budget going forward. In fact, colleagues will remember that Republicans badgered the Senate for, in past years, not having passed a budget, and the Senate passed a budget. The Senate worked hard, passed a budget, and we looked forward to a more normal process being resumed, but we were soon disabused of that, because the Republican leadership of this House steadfastly refused to go to conference to work out a common budget with the Senate, which, of course, is the normal process. They refused to do that. We've been urging it for months. Well, why did they refuse that? We've thought a lot about this. One possible reason is that no comprehensive budget plan could possibly pass their conference, given the Tea Party influence in that conference these days. That is an explanation that is suggested, I have to say, by the failure of Speaker Boehner's Plan B, remember that, back in December? Leaving the President Obama's budget overture on the table, never taking him up on that comprehensive offer. But then after a while, our Republican friends seemed to really like the idea of stalling on this. And we gradually realized they're running out the clock. The Republicans are running out the clock. And why are they doing that? Because in a crisis atmosphere now, letting the government shut down, running up against the possibility of default, in a crisis atmosphere, maybe they can extract more. Indeed, they can extract more, they think, by demanding a ransom, a political ransom, the Affordable Care Act, whatever. Because now, with the clock run out, you're talking not just about negotiating a budget. You're talking about demanding a ransom merely to keep the government open. Demanding a ransom merely to pay the country's bills. Basic constitutional responsibilities which this body should meet without any threat of extortion. Meanwhile, of course, they understand the public doesn't like this, so we have the spectacle today of yet another bill seeking political cover to ostensibly fund a function of government which has been in the news. Well, the charade has to end. Yes, we need to get back to the normal budget process in this country. The first step to that is to pass a clean funding bill to reopen the government, and the votes are here in this body to do that this afternoon. We must lift the threat of defaulting on the nation's debt. And then, sure enough, let's get on with the negotiating of a comprehensive budget agreement. A budget agreement along the lines of the budget plans of 1990 and 1993. Budget plans that ended up stimulating this economy, prompting an economic boom, and running 4 years of budget surpluses. We paid off $400 billion of the national debt in those years. Those were comprehensive agreements, sure enough. They were politically tough, sure enough. They did include revenues. They included all categories of spending. They were painful votes for many in this body. I will continue to think they were among the best votes I ever cast. But that's where we need to go. We all know that. The question is, can we find the political will to get there? So let's muster that political will. We've had enough of the ransom demands. Let's reopen the government. Let's lift the debt ceiling. And let's get on with serious negotiations, the kind of budget negotiations we should have been having all year. With that, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields his time. The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as so much time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, if anyone has been watching what's gone on in this House for the last couple of weeks and this week, it reminds me of the movie Groundhog Day. The alarm rings and we stand up and we do the same thing and we hear the same arguments consistently. I mean, you could just heard this argument, and that's the argument that's been made throughout the entire last almost 2 weeks now. So maybe it's time to just talk about something that is called regular order in this House of Representatives. We have something called the appropriations process. And we divide up the funding of the government into 12 sections, and we have classifications for those sections, and each subcommittee presents a bill to the committee for the funding of a certain department. In our case, Mr. Price and I deal with Homeland Security. And that bill is then brought to the floor and passed by the floor after it passes out of the regular committee, and then it's sent to our colleagues in the Senate, the other side of this great building. And at that point in time, normal procedure would be for them to deal with the appropriations process on their side. So I can't speak for all of the government. I certainly can speak for Homeland Security. And Mr. Price, I don't think would dispute this. We passed our bill out of the House. So we don't even need to be here today, and we shouldn't even need to be here last week when we were here, because quite frankly, we've given a bill to deal with the problems of financing and supporting those people who defend our borders and all the other things that we take care of in Homeland has been sitting on the desk of Mr. Harry Reid in the Senate since June of this year, a long time before this so-called crisis arose. We could have it completely passed and signed by the President if the Senate had just done regular order. But they haven't. So as we relate to the issues we discuss here today, the reason these issues even come up is that the Democrat-controlled Senate has not done their job, and they have not dealt with the appropriations process. Today, as last week, we're dealing with an important portion of this process. So important that the very security of our nation depends upon a secure border. The great debate that has gone on for almost 3 or 4 years in the recent years as we look at the overall immigration crisis is, what about the security of our borders? And we spent billions of dollars making it as secure as we can, and we will continue to secure those borders. All we think we should do is pay the people that are doing the job now and get the borders secure. This is important to the future of our nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 371, the previous question is ordered. Questions on engrossment, third reading of the joint resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
Joint resolution making continuing appropriations for certain components of the Department of Homeland Security for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration of House Joint Resolution 79 is postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess for a period of less than 15 minutes.
On the 10th day of the government shutdown, The House of Representatives is considering legislation to fund border security programs. Also today, House Speaker John Boehner announced he plans a vote on a 6-week extension of the debt ceiling. The Treasury Department says it will run out of money to pay the government's bills next week. Speaker Boehner made the announcement about the debt ceiling this morning at a brief news conference with other House Republican leaders. First, we'll hear from House Republican Conference Chairman Cathy McMorris Rodgers.